Well, here we are back again. Happy Thursday, everyone coming off. Everyone's back home after the Grey Cup here. Appreciate everyone checking in. We'll put the panel up here. We got Andy on here, Jason, everyone's on. We'll do some prefacey stuff here, and then we'll kind of get into everything. Thanks, everyone, for checking us out here back stateside. Jason's back in Hamilton following the Grey Cup. Appreciate that. 15,000 plus watching the pregame show. Not too bad. I'll get into more of that later. We'll talk through Grey Cup recap today, kind of the collapse of Winnipeg. We're going to talk the Rick Campbell, Edmonton Elks, BC Lions news. We'll do stories and everything else from the Grey Cup today. So like and subscribe. We're transitioning out of CFL. We'll be moving into the UFL here. I think we're getting a schedule here maybe at some point. Andy, and we had another press release today talking things about the UFL that isn't the schedule. But if you want any of that, and once we start getting some actual UFL episodes, maybe we'll do some off-season CFL interviews. They just don't. Cody Fajardo or whoever for 12 minutes kind of standalone just doesn't really do it on the YouTube. But let's go around the horn here. Jason, back in Hamilton. Jason, sir, how are you doing?
Doing good, Reed. All recovered from the trip out west and, ready to talk about what we experienced over the weekend.
Evan, how are you? Evan getting on another flight here. He says tomorrow back home for Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. But Evan, how are you, sir?
Yeah, doing well. It's been busy, man. Obviously had some delays getting out there to Vancouver for Grey Cup, but really enjoyed my time. We'll get into that. Made it back without any issues, and then on the road again, since that's what my life seems to be nowadays. So, yeah, all good, man.
Andy, how are you, sir?
I'm great, but I just want to make sure, did you have a hard time settling on one of your 500 hyperbolic headlines for this podcast, or are you satisfied with what you have?
Yeah, it was really hard because I'm like, every once in a while I'm like sitting around and, if we had done more, if I hadn't been so busy this summer, like sometimes I like to sit around and workshop. Yeah, it was like the CFL blew our minds or the Grey Cup. And then I've got that vidIQ that'll give you like a couple free ideas a day. And I'm like, okay, I got to wait. It's like you're doing the Candy Crush, right? I got to wait 24 hours and then I can try again. But I think it's good. I was already getting some Winnipeg people mad at me, talking about that. But I do think it's a little bit of a collapse here. One of the biggest, you could look at the collapse of a game, collapse of a season, collapse of a dynasty here. I know Milt Siegel's big on that, but lots of CFL stuff to talk about. Yes, Evan would have been part of the live show, and I think I said that off the top, like, of our live stream, like, oh, Evan, we'll talk about that. I don't think I ever did. I had a couple of mimosas before brunch, Jason and I had, but yeah, Evan delayed getting out, part of everything else for Grey Cup, but just wasn't able to be part of the live stream. Real quick, like I said, thanks to everyone for checking out the stream. I thought it was really cool. Obviously, last year's stream kind of popped the algorithm, and I think people looking for illegal streams. But we did about 15,000 in Saskatchewan, did about 15,000 this week. I feel like that's kind of at least a sample size now for that. But more views than anything YouTube I saw of anyone except the CFL posting the game and then the halftime show with the Jonas Brothers. But anyone else I bumped shoulders with all weekend that was involved in the YouTube space, I thought I didn't see anything else. So unless I'm mistaken, but that speaks to me the importance of having independent people like us associated covering the league, helps having a diverse set of opinions, helps having people from down south. I think Jason's always been a wealth of knowledge kind of in that more alternative space in Canada on the other side. So it just further solidifies that as we look at the UFL and everything else. Like, I think you need to have a breadth of that, and I have great respect for the Jeff Hamiltons and Tim Baynes of the world and everyone else with news and everything. But I think that this space and kind of figuring out alternative ways to cover the league, I think it just shows that. Andy, what did you make of that? Real quick, I don't want to bend over and pat ourselves on the back too much, but I thought it was a strong showing. I thought we did a good job.
I think just the sheer people that came up onto your podcast was really impressive. I really liked the media row there, and I especially liked the guests that you had on. I know some of them are repeats from years past, but you also had a really good rotation of people, not only just talking about, as you always do, not just the game, but also the state of the league. It's a shame the one person I will say I did not get to meet this weekend was Farhan. I did not get to meet. Yeah, Farhan wasn't on the show, and I didn't get to pass by him. I didn't remember seeing him at all at any juncture during the entire weekend, unless he was on the sideline during the game. So it's unfortunate because I really wanted to meet him. But other than that, fantastic set of guests again. And I think that just goes to show just the effort that you made to make yourself known in the presence of the CFL mediascape, and to draw those kinds of numbers from someone who's so independent, just 4 short years really in work, I think is a testament to not only the work you put in, but I also think it's a testament to what can be done by others. I think people can put in that effort. I know there was conversation. I actually listened to the Flight Deck guys, who, by the way, were fantastic. Tim and
Awesome. Yep.
Cliff, you're awesome guys. Talked to them all weekend. But I listened to their podcast, and they made a point about how that one thing that, in regards to this topic, the CFL could maybe do a little bit better as far as having a media row and reaching out to podcasts more like.
Yes.
I'm not. I actually wanted to ask you: did you reach out specifically to them, or did they actually give you a bit of a line? Because that was one thing that they did mention on their podcast.
Yeah, no, there was because obviously we were with BC last year, and so we were involved in all of that. I thought that was really tremendous to have the radio row. I thought having Rod Peterson, we'll do more kind of. I want to tell, we'll have funny stories here on the back end, but having that, I do agree. There's growth for that. We were not invited to be part of the the CFL Content Creators Program. I don't think I've done enough work this season to justify that, but I think it's interesting when you look at that of like, well, I didn't run into anyone else. I didn't run into Coach Phil. I didn't run into CFL Reddit there. I didn't see anybody there. And so I think that they're working on that. I know that Christine in the league was talking to me last year about that, about, we really want to incorporate more and kind of bolster that. I just think if you don't, like I look at like Darren Bombing as a perfect example of like, here's someone that, has found the space and carved that niche out of like, hey, if we're not going to get the coverage that we want of Winnipeg sports, we need to do that ourselves. And I thought that their post-game stream was tremendous. I watched part of it, and then we were at dinner, and then I watched a lot of it when I got back to the room. And I think having that, just that wealth, and Tim and Cliffy and everybody else, I think it's really important. And it shows the breadth that we can reach when we all come together and you get a lot of different voices. So yeah, we were blessed enough to be a part of that. But yeah, I think that needs to be a concerted effort going, just have a media row of podcasters if you want. There's 15, 20 people that you could get together and build that out. Evan, anything else from you? We'll go Jason, then we'll talk through the game here. I don't want to bore people too much on the front end.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a shame that I, missed the show this year, and you always do a great job with that. I thought this year's was equally good, and I think, having Brian on, specifically a player, really kind of enhanced some things. And, that doesn't put anybody else, to shame or whatever. Everybody did a great job, but, again, it's nice to see that being worked in. The fact, again, that all that lined up is still a bit crazy to me. But yeah, man, no, it's just it was good to see everybody up there, and it's too bad that I was a bit late, but still made the most of it in the end. So
yeah, I thought it was crazy. And maybe Jason, your thoughts real quick, like the fact that we have Brian on, and this is someone that we've known for years in the media space and the spring leagues and everything, and to have him on the show, and it's kind of okay, you're the third string, but we kind of know you and we've had history. But then Jason, to see him sitting there, and I was posting the photos like on the Grey Cup stage and holding the trophy, and I just felt like we were kind of a part of that moment and a part of that journey. It was just cool to show like it is not that large of a space. I mean, we all are very connected here, and there's a lot of overlap. And like Andy was talking, Tim and Cliffy and everyone else, like it's not that large of a group. And I think we do a good job of supporting that, but I thought that was cool. Any other thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, Brian Scott, meeting him, he just seemed like such a great, genuine, charismatic guy. Obviously, you guys are very fond of him, and it almost made me want to cheer for Toronto in the game, even though I'm a Tiger Cats fan. And, ultimately, like this show, I'm always amazed by how you're able to put it all together, coordinate all these guests. I think the unsung hero is Dorothy, your wife, coordinating all these guests and making sure they're ready for their appearance on the show. So it's really impressive what we've been able to do and what you guys have been able to do in terms of putting together the show every year.
So my mother watched the stream. She said her favorite people were that really nice boy at the end, which I knew she meant Brian Scott. I said, okay, that makes sense. And she goes, he really loves you. He just really loves you. And then she liked that man with the nice hair. And I'm like, okay, we have a lot of people with nice hair on the show. And Mike Hogan's the man from Florida, Rod Peterson. Really liked Rod Peterson, that man with the nice hair from Florida. So anyway, we'll do more festival stuff here in a little bit. We'll talk through all that. Andy, we'll go with you first. You've seen the title of the episode, Biggest Collapse, but I'll tell you, we got to the media room that night following everything, and we did dinner and everything else. I know Jason was getting ready to fly back. there was a lot of questions being asked from the Winnipeg people, and we were starting to get the Jeff Hamiltons of the world in there. And I mean, even Jamie Nye, and when Darren got in there, a lot of hard questions for the Blue Bombers. And, okay, why did we run Oliveira more and Zach Claris's hand and all that? Andy, what did you make of this now, kind of having, because real time, like, and there was even some kind of question in the reporters' room, like, well, was this a good Grey Cup? I thought this was a classic Grey Cup. I don't know if it holds on a rewatch, but I think going in and knowing, and all the pressures on Winnipeg and Toronto's coming in, and really tremendous for me. Andy, what did you make of the game, and then kind of the initial thesis, and we can break down more?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. You can look at the box score and just say, well, this doesn't seem like it was very close of a match. For all of us who were sitting there, we very much felt the tension from the get-go, and felt it really until there were about 6 minutes or 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter that it dissipated because of that pick six at the end, or near the end. But you see, the thing is that tension was there the entire time, because you just didn't know what was going to happen with the Argos. You didn't know if they're going to be able to perform on offense. You didn't know if was Winnipeg finally going to complete the dynasty, and they demonstratively did not. And I know there are people out there who will make the argument that it is still a dynasty because they made 5 straight Grey Cups. But listen, the rule is this: you are not getting a dynasty because you participate. You're getting a dynasty because you win. You won 2 out of 5. And the general rule is that you win 3 or 4 in a certain span of time, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever you combination you wish. But there has to be a certain set of time with a certain set of players that make that qualified. I'm sorry to Milt Stegall. He was very demonstrative on his on the show afterwards on TSN and said that it was a dynasty. I disagree with him, and I think many other people would, just based on how it was. And yes, while you could make an argument that it was Winnipeg falling flat, and there are a lot of many shortcomings they have, Toronto just came out and won the game. They had an excellent game plan. Ryan Dinwiddie is one of, if not the best coach in this league. He has done nothing but be successful since he took over this Toronto regime. He has won with multiple different quarterbacks. He has taken a roster that got gutted in the offseason. I know they were able to replenish some of that roster talent, but still it would remain to be seen what they would do with it. And he has just come up roses every single time. He has gone to 4 straight Eastern finals. He's won 2 out of the 3 years in the Grey Cup. I mean, if any case, Toronto's the one that's going to start possibly making a dynasty. And it was the biggest irony to me personally was seeing that guy with that sign. As we were coming out of halftime, they showed it on the Jumbotron, that guy that's had the sign that said, "A dynasty will be born in 30 minutes." And I'm sitting there being like, I hope that doesn't come back to bite him. And now I'm almost sitting there being like, is that a prophecy for the other team? Because that was a Winnipeg fan that was holding that sign. Now I'm starting to think, could Toronto potentially be making a run here in the next few years? And they've shown that it does not matter what assets they have. It does not matter what injuries they sustain. It does not matter what controversy they go through. They have been successful this entire time under the Dinwiddie regime. And that to me is what stuck out the most.
Let me leave probably Jason here, just talking on that. And obviously, as a Bills fan, and plenty, and not to rub, but plenty of making it to the Super Bowl and participated and not. Curious how that relates to your thoughts, and then thoughts on the game, because I was fortunate enough I was able to sneak up and get a seat. There just happened to be I could tell about Garth later. Next to Garth, my man, I sat next to me from Saskatchewan, but was able to we were with you two during the game. So curious your thoughts on that, and as it relates to kind of the dynasty talk as well.
Well, I think there's something to be said about getting to the championship game in any respective sport. I've always considered that, better than losing like before that. I think there's something to be said for that. But at the same time, you can't call this a dynasty just because what Andy said, winning 3 championships in a certain span of time, that's really what the definition is. And ultimately, they have not been able to, close that 3rd championship, and they've had 3 cracks at it. They've arguably been the heavy favorite in every single Grey Cup that they've been in. And ultimately, they've been very disappointing in a lot of these games. Zach Claris continuing to struggle in Grey Cups, obviously suffered the injury in the second half of this one, and we'll get to it. But I don't think, given the extent of the injury and what we knew after the fact, that he should have been put back into the game. I think they should have just rode with the backup, just given the fact that he couldn't really grip and throw a football. So, ultimately, it's very disappointing for Winnipeg. I don't consider them a dynasty right now. I mean, they could still, if they win next year, they get to 6 straight, they win 3 out of 6, I would still consider them a dynasty. But ultimately, it's going to be very interesting to see going into next year in a hosting Grey Cup year if they can get back there.
Well, I want to circle back to the Calero stuff because I've been kind of reading this week and I haven't had, just trying to get back in the swing, a deep dive on that. I was reading about the Pez suspension and all that stuff. But Evan, to you, we were talking in the group chat about like it almost now with Toronto, it almost takes away from Winnipeg's wins, or they were only able to win against Hamilton, or like retroactively now, does this change kind of any of the thoughts of the games that Winnipeg had won?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, Winnipeg, again, it was a very interesting situation because they won in 2019 against Hamilton in very commanding fashion. And then you had a COVID year and they came back out and won it again. So I think it's really impressive that a season was canceled and they were still able to come back and win the whole thing. And look, I understand the 2021 season was shortened due to COVID and it was later in the year. And, there were some variables there that we might not see again. But with Toronto, it's almost more impressive, these past 2 wins that they've had against Winnipeg. And yes, I understand they're against the same team, and that's kind of, maybe the argument that we're discussing. But if you look at, the Argonauts team in 2022 that won it, the MVP of that game was Hanok Mwamba, who's now a panelist on TSN.
Yeah.
McLeod Bethel-Thompson was the quarterback who went to the USFL and then went back to the CFL this year with a different team. But and it was in that Grey Cup that Chad Kelly played really for the first time and emerged, and then went on and had the 16-2 season. And obviously this year with his suspension, we didn't get to see him as much. And then the unfortunate injury that led to Nick Arbuckle starting in the Grey Cup. But it's incredible. They've had now 4 different, maybe even 5 different quarterbacks, over this time span between 2022 and 2024, and they still got the job done. It hasn't mattered to them. Again, it starts at the top, with management and personnel to construct the roster. And then Andy's already talked about Ryan Dinwiddie, who, I really think deserves some credit, for what he's done. And again, I understand, Coach of the Year, Jason Moss being the pick out of the East. Like, I get it, and not to take away from what Jason Moss did either, or Corey Mace or any of those candidates. But what Ryan Dinwiddie has done with that team is incredible. It has not been an easy journey for him. And I remember before the game started, he said, well, we've earned the right to be here. We deserve this, and we think we can go out there and compete. And sure enough, they did. Now you kind of enter a new conversation where Winnipeg's dynasty, I'm not going to say that it's closed yet. Again, you're hosting the Grey Cup in Winnipeg next year, so maybe they make a push. We'll get into all that later. But Toronto, having won 2 out of the past 3 with very different circumstances, I'd say, in each of the games, is extremely impressive, and hopefully they can keep that up.
So Andy, I think there's, and I'm kind of pulled up the stats here, just because obviously we were at the game, which I'm like, normally I gotta go back and do this refresher course before the stream. But I think there's a couple of different questions to talk about here. One, and I know Evan will have thoughts later. Arbuckle's performance, right? I think Evan had coined them heart attack passes, many of them during the game that were very close to being picked or intercepted. You have Caleros right now, X number of Grey Cups, with multiple turnovers, no touchdown passes, all that stuff. And then the lack of Oliveira, I know that was kind of the touching point when we got back to the suite was, how do you have the MOP like that? Only have 11 carries, 84 rushes. Obviously, once the game gets out of hand and we're throwing in that exacerbated the number of interceptions that Caleros throw. Where do you want to start, Andy, kind of with any of those storylines? Obviously, there's a million other ones if you have anything else as well, but those are kind of the 3 that stuck out to me, the easy ones.
I never thought I'd be going into this game thinking, boy, I think Winnipeg's going to miss Drew Brown. But you know what? That's kind of the case here, because let's look at the facts here. Terry Wilson came into this game when Zach was out, when he got taken to the locker room, and apparently his finger just split open. I mean, some of the reports on that will make me nauseous just to think about it. But Terry Wilson comes in and he almost throws a pick to Benji Franklin, which would have been his second of the game, into the end zone. He absolutely had it right in his mitts. And
yeah, I was amazed. And that was right in front of us where we were. I think all of us, because Jason was on that side too.
It was. And so, Terry Wilson's not throwing the ball very well. So you're thinking as an offensive coordinator, Buck Pierce, well, I don't know if I can put him back in. But Zach clearly can't throw the ball. And Zach had kind of admitted to such afterwards. Like, he really struggled. And you saw it immediately. He throws that pick right off the boundary. I think it was to Amos, to Sean Amos maybe. And then he just struggled mightily, and it just started to unravel very quickly. To the point about Brady Oliveira, I mean, the thing that I just didn't really understand is why they were so adamant about throwing on first down, and especially after Zach came back from injury, they continue to do so. I think they absolutely had an opportunity to continue at least trying to work Brady Oliveira into the lineup. He probably could have had a few more rushes, and maybe there were tendencies that perhaps Toronto was keen in on of him running, and maybe just in the formation it didn't set up to be so, but you would have thought that he would have been a little bit more involved, just considering what was going on around him, especially from the passing game standpoint. So that to me just kind of surprised me. And I know there were a lot of Winnipeg fans that were a bit upset with Buck Pierce and his play calling afterwards, but just kind of the management of the injury with Zach Collaros, I think really threw a wrench in the plans. And once apparently I read somewhere where apparently when Dinwiddie when they saw that Collaros was warming up and they saw how he was throwing, they thought, we got this. And to have that kind of confidence as a team when you see the other teams one of their best assets being hurt, I think really was telling, especially in that fourth quarter.
Well, it was wild because we were sitting there on that side, and I saw Collaros. I just happened to look down and saw Collaros run out, and I'm like, well, he's either like, obviously he's not limping off the field, so he's either got to go make a bathroom break or like something's wrong. We just really wasn't really sure. And I think it was Anthony Miller in the group chat, obviously watching on TV back in the States, of like, oh, well, here, that like, and it was kind of nice for all the people in our section because we could kind of get the insights. So we didn't, we're not getting the game broadcast and all that stuff. Jason, were you surprised with that? And like, here, Mike O'Shea is revered as a coach of anyone in the league, right? And I know that all the media and everyone speaks really highly of him, and obviously a great guy, on and off the field. But to have multiple games now, be outcoached by Dinwiddie, and then kind of seeing his reluctance to kind of do anything else when the game was getting out of hand. What did you make of that, Jason?
Yeah, I think I said this on the pregame show that I think Brian Dinwiddie may be the best coach in the CFL. I think he may have taken that title from Mike O'Shea. I mean, even before the game, during the pregame show, like I was saying, I thought that Dinwiddie had a case, and I think with winning this game, being 2-0 against him in Grey Cups, like you were saying, I think you have to give him that title at this point, and just the game plan that he had for Nick Arbuckle in this one. Nick Arbuckle, he made his mistakes in this one, had the 2 picks. I think he had a couple of dropped interceptions that you alluded to, but ultimately they did a good job of making stuff pretty easy for him. I think they had some screen passes that, the Kevin Mattal touchdown, that was a good little swing pass, get the ball out of his hands quickly. Arbuckle still had to make some plays, and that's why he was named MVP of this game. But ultimately, they did a good job of, setting up those screen passes and really involving the running backs and making it easier on them. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a big reason why Toronto was able to have success and ultimately win this game and go 3-0 against Winnipeg on the season.
Yeah, it's, Arbuckle got the MVP, and we can talk about that like little trophy kind of thing, like that his daughter was holding. It felt like it was almost like a toy for her. But, there wasn't really a standout, right? Evan, was that your take? I mean, it felt like it was not in a bad way, but it was more of a group effort from Toronto there. I mean, obviously, Nick's the quarterback. What did you make of that?
Yeah, well, look, I think the best player in this game was Willie Jefferson, and I've probably said it on the show before at some point, back when we were doing this regularly, but, Willie Jefferson, man, I mean, he's one of my favorite players in the league, and watching him in that game, the way that he was able to essentially take over on defense, I still feel like Winnipeg's defense put up a pretty good effort there, obviously through 3.5 quarters, but he, really excelled, and I almost would have given him the award in that game anyways, regardless of who won. For like, if I had to pick MVP, the guy that I think makes the most sense would probably be Wynton McManus. You have, I was telling Andy, I think during the game, if there was like a playoff MVP, just for somebody who had a good run in the playoffs, it would have been Benji Franklin with his interceptions. And, he made so many critical plays at critical times. I think that's a guy, who really kind of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, because I knew who he was before he signed and before he started gaining some traction there. But, really, again, came up big when it mattered. So, yeah, look, man, I, in terms of the game overall, I'll start with Winnipeg's side. I think, yes, some of the play calling, could have been better. And then, I don't know, it didn't look very good in the first half. Like, it wasn't bad, but then the Collaros injury was just where you kind of knew that things were probably done. I still gave him a chance. Like, again, we didn't know the severity of the injury sitting there, but I remember when he came back onto the field, and it took me a minute to notice, but he had an entire glove on his throwing hand, and I thought, oh boy, that would suggest to me that his injury is pretty serious. And of course, as we found out after the game, the way Zach said it and the way a couple other people said it, I mean, the fact that somebody's finger looks like a Pez dispenser is extremely alarming. And, maybe, you should have kept Terry Wilson in. It's a difficult decision, though, right? I think, I almost wonder, Andy had mentioned Drew Brown, but like if Chris Streveler was healthy, what could he have done in that game? Because I remember, I think it was Winnipeg's first Grey Cup run in 2019, which is when I first kind of started following the league. He was a really key contributor there. And he, they almost had a 2-quarterback system where he was able to come in and really give the offense a boost when needed. And, maybe that would take away from some of the play calls that weren't so good. So for Winnipeg, it's just unfortunate. I think, look, if Collaros doesn't get hurt, he wasn't playing well before that, but they still might have had a chance, to turn it around. I went back today just randomly and watched the 2021 West Final where Blue Bombers turned it over 5 times, but still won the game because at the end, Winnipeg went up 21-17 on a touchdown and then got a defensive stop. So, maybe in a different world that would have been the case. As for Toronto, just again, incredible game plan by Ryan Dinwiddie, setting Nick Arbuckle up for success. Look, Arbuckle, during that game, was he perfect? No, and I didn't expect him to be. I think one of the keys to that game for many people going in was, you can't put this all on Arbuckle's shoulders. You really have to, other people are going to have to step up, and they did. Especially on defense. Again, I think that was the story, was Toronto's defense. Like, Arbuckle kind of got them to where they needed to be. He got them in a position to win the game. But then Toronto's defense really took over, and, well, they also took advantage of Collaros' injured hand and kind of said, we've got this from here, and rode that game out in the final 5 minutes. So, look, it was a very impressive performance by them. Unfortunate in the sense that I think some people who didn't watch the game will look at the score and think, well, that was, maybe a waste of time. But in reality, no, like if you watched it, that game, going into the fourth quarter, even with like 7 minutes left, I had no idea who was going to win. So it was a great game, and, well done to both teams. I know it's tough for Winnipeg, and I'm sure we'll get into that more here as the show goes on. But, well done by both teams being there, and congratulations to Toronto.
Yeah, it was because even Dorothy obviously had to fly back early for her uncle's memorial, and she was, tracking the game just on her phone, and she's texting me like, "Wow, the game seems really close." And then obviously, totally unravels there. I thought it was funny because I texted Paul Sanchez, formerly here, whatever, after the game, and I go, Brian Scott's a Grey Cup champion, and Paul immediately texted me a selfie of him. He went and put on his Toronto Argos jersey that I think Josh had mailed to him like 3.5 years ago. I go, oh, must be nice to kind of pull that out. Without getting too graphic, can someone explain to me the Pez dispenser analogy? I don't understand that. Like how the finger, Jason, did you fall? Like, was it like, I didn't understand that metaphor.
No, I didn't. I didn't get that metaphor. that's the first time I've heard it just on the show here.
No, I saw that. No, I mean, 3 Down did the write-up that it looked like a Pez dispenser. I just don't like. Was it because the Pez dispenser like opens, or was it like the Pez dispenser like the head opens and like was the finger open like that?
Yeah, well, look,
that's what it was. Maybe the tip of the finger.
Yeah,
was
so
like,
Pez dispenser typically opens up to where there's a bit at the bottom that's kind of hanging off. So I assume they meant that was Zach's finger was kind of,
Okay, all right.
I mean, look, I'm not the one who made the analogy. I'm just going off what's been thrown out there in the media already. So.
Yeah, I sure as hell wasn't going to retell that.
I just was curious because I'm like trying to talk to Dorothy about it. Like, it sounded like it was really bad. So Andy, I mean, the fact that Michael Shea, you'd see Collaros come back in. Okay, let's give it a shot. Right, comes in immediately. Either sailed the pass right through the pick. Okay, then we go back to that again. Like, obviously, you got Terry Wilson. We've talked about that, but like, are you just screwed at that point? I mean, you go down your starting quarterback. I mean, that's, I guess, when you have that question, like, should we have kept the Drew Brown or had someone there that we felt comfortable throwing passes with if something were to happen, knowing the CFL and especially where Zach isn't necessarily Iron Man. I mean, Zach missed games this season, missed games last year. What did you make of that, Andy?
I think part of it was just unfortunate timing for them, because to go back a week before that, I mean, Zach Collaros had a fantastic game against Saskatchewan and absolutely eviscerated their defense in a game that they just absolutely curd stomped them. And that's why the spread was as high as it was. It got started at 10, and I think it went bet down to +9 or -9 or -8 in some markets. But I mean, basically teams were saying, this is yours to lose. Like, you are heavily favored in this game. And part of that was because of how their offense was performing and how the team was performing up until that point. So while it's unfortunate the injury happened, I don't really necessarily blame Winnipeg for not having someone immediately behind him, because they lost Strevler. Obviously, they lost him during the season. Drew Brown, they were never going to pay enough money to keep him back, especially when he was basically garnering starter money, which he got in Ottawa. So it's hard to kind of say, well, I wish you had another quarterback behind him. I mean, I always am a proponent of developing people behind the quarterback, but sometimes circumstances just don't lead up to that. And again, maybe they were just happy enough with what Terry Wilson brought to the table that they were willing to see what would happen. But again, you can't anticipate that your starting quarterback is going to go out, which again is why it's so incredible that Arbuckle was able to do what he did, coming in for the likes of Chad Kelly in this big of a game, a guy that never started a playoff game, ever. Arbuckle's been in this league for a while. He's had a lot of games. He's never started a CFL playoff game. So more of a testament to Dinwiddie and his staff. But for the Bombers, I mean, it was terrible luck. And as soon as he threw that pick to Robert Priester, who was running it back, even before Robert even got in the end zone, I was yelling out, "It's over. It's gone. Like, that's it. The game was over." It was just such a finality point of that match, and really just such a stamp on what the Argos had done.
It's fine. I'm just pulled up here. Yeah, Brown was on a $286,000 contract with Ottawa, set to go up to $340,000, and with incentives. Like, should have done the BC route there. Should have get some marketing money in there. Get Drew Brown under that. Jason, so at the beginning of the game, obviously a lot was made of Toronto not going for the settling for the field goal, not going for the touchdown, and we're thinking, like, oh my god, like, that's going to be the story of the game, right? Like, Toronto had whatever, and they lost the momentum. Lucky Whitehead then fumbling, and I think if Andy Murray wants to check the momentum meter, I think that swung it back the other way. I guess, having lived through the game and kind of things that you thought were going to be touchstones, where really it was just ended up being Zach Collaros' finger was falling off, and Winnipeg didn't have a backup plan for that. Thoughts of anything else of the game that way, of just the things that we thought were going to matter or didn't, or kind of final takeaways of that, and then we can start looking towards kind of the future here.
Yeah, I thought the biggest play of the game was that Lucky Whitehead fumble, because I thought that Winnipeg had the game. Yes, it was close. I thought they were still in control of the game at that point, but the fact that they fumbled, and then I think that was when the Kevin Mattel touchdown happened a couple of plays later, maybe the next play, and that's when Toronto was like really starting to believe that they could win this thing. And there was also another key play where I believe it was a blocked punt that Winnipeg was going to get the ball deep in Toronto territory, but they got a penalty for, I think it was loose ball interference is what it's called. And the guy for Winnipeg pushed the Toronto player in the back. And, I was saying to Alex, my girlfriend, I don't know what that penalty is called, but I know you can't just push someone in the back like that. And, sure enough that, Toronto retained possession of the ball, and that would have been a crucial play for Winnipeg in the game. So ultimately, we say it all the time in football, it often comes down to a couple of plays during the game. And I think if Winnipeg had those couple of plays go in their favor or not happen at all, I think we're talking about a pretty different ball game. And, obviously, if they had kept Brady Oliveira more involved in this game. And it's the most baffling thing to me about that is that he had a lot of success in this game. He was getting chunk run after chunk run, but they decided to ride with Zach. And, it's crazy considering how he's played in these Grey Cup games that they trusted him more than Brady, their MOP.
Yeah, it was funny. We didn't know either, like obviously in the stands. I think they announced the penalty, but we couldn't really hear it. And then we were texting Anthony Miller and Pat. I think we were watching, like, okay, what's going on? And finally, I think Naylor tweeted out the rules, and I was just like, thanks, Dad. Like, because we were like, everyone in the stands is like, no one is. It was like last night at the Kraken game. The Predators had they called a penalty 20 seconds into the game where they had actually announced a different starting lineup than they started. And like, no one had ever, like, everyone on Kraken Tour was like, I've been following hockey, 30 years. I've never seen that before. So it was kind of one of those things. Andy, let's start looking forward here, right? We saw Chad Kelly on the, from the parade, screaming very loud into a microphone. I wasn't as happy to see that. I enjoyed seeing our friend Mike Hogan getting to introduce the Argonauts. I sent a message on all of our behalf to Mike Hogan, congratulating him and saying thanks again for all that stuff. But obviously, Nick Arbuckle did not play enough. Chad Kelly will come back and do that. What are your thoughts on Toronto moving forward and then Winnipeg here? Because, you're hosting next year. Everyone's talking. It would be the sheer irony would be to have Winnipeg not be in it next year.
It certainly would be. I mean, it'd be even funnier if Saskatchewan made that game and then suddenly they forced their hands to try and sell tickets. If they did a reverse Uno card from when they did it in 2022, that'd be quite something. But yeah, to look at Toronto a little bit, their free agent list is quite extensive here. They've got a lot of decisions to make, as most CFL teams do. Nick Arbuckle, Cameron Dukes are set to be free agents. Kadeem Carey, he's getting up there in years. He was great this year for them. I don't know if they necessarily bring him back. DeMonte Coxey, who's really made a lot of big plays for them, he's set to be a free agent. Janarian Grant, they're fantastic returner. I imagine they have to bring him back in some capacity. Jake Serezna, a guy who's a fantastic pass rusher. Their defensive backfield, it's all the defensive backs. That's really the biggest list here. Guys like Royce Mechie, Robert Priester, Tavares McFadden, Deshaun Amos, really key starters and contributors in the secondary. They got to kind of think about maybe replacing going forward. But, the thing about this game, and this is kind of the brilliance of the Argos and what they've done the last few years, they've always managed to find a way to kind of replenish their talent and restock the shelves. I mean, Kevin Mittal scoring a touchdown, a rookie, who afterwards said that this meant more to him than winning the Vanier Cup and the Head Crichton Trophy. Obviously, is one of the best players in youth sports in Canada. He winning the way they won and the way he scored that touchdown, the go-ahead touchdown, kind of was like a picture into the future of the shape of the Argos to come in a way. So yes, we'll see if Chad Kelly is able to return healthily, whoever they bring in as his backup. Maybe they bring, Brian Scott back. Who knows? Maybe they keep him around. We'll see. That would be quite the clout for this podcast if that was the case. But yeah, I mean, I have really no issue with how they're going to be able to replenish their talent because they always seem to find a way. Although there are some other structural things we can get into later about what's going on with the team later on down the road. But as far as Winnipeg goes, I mean, it sounds like everybody's trying to come back. Adam Big Hill said he's trying to come back. Stanley Bryant says he's trying to come back. A lot of the guys are obviously, Father Time is undefeated, and Father Time's going to have to come collect here at some point. Claros' health is always in question. He's getting up there in years. Brady Oliveira is really the kind of the centerpiece here. I mean, he's still in his prime, so you could still utilize him, but there's still a lot of other pieces that to think about. The question for them is, can they replenish that talent quickly enough to still be competitive? This is kind of the same problem that the New England Patriots had when they had their first dynasty run in 3 or 4 years. Then everybody got really old. Tom Brady and Belichick were still there, but it took them a while to really get back into contention. So is that going to happen here with Winnipeg? I'm not sure, but I just see everyone's kind of waiting for the cliff, right? Everyone's waiting for wins. When are they going to hit the cliff? Is it going to be next year? Is it the year after? Some people thought it was this year, and it looked like it was for a month. But they seem to be in at least a more questionable shape, in my opinion, at least as far as Toronto goes. Even if Toronto might have a bigger free agency list, I think I have a little bit more confidence that Toronto's going to try and figure it out if things, change, as opposed to if Winnipeg just, finally hits the wall.
One side note here, we'll toss to Evan thoughts on this continuing conversation, but just, I know a lot of people probably thought famously, the Mark Cass curse where, Ben Holmes didn't go on the podcast and then went on and won a Grey Cup with Toronto. And I'm sure people were like, Well, Brian, Brian was on the show, and then he went and won the. For those that know behind the scenes, there's been many other times that Brian was supposed to come on the podcast and didn't. So I think that the no show still holds true with Brian Scott no show. That he's probably got 3 more Grey Cup runs in him that Brian's accrued by no showing the podcast before that's going to kick into effect. So just I thought that was interesting. Evan, where does Winnipeg go from here? Where does Toronto go from here?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it's pretty clear that, this will be a big offseason in the league. There's going to be a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
Winnipeg, like Andy already pointed out, Father Time is gonna catch up at some point and has to collect. Like I remember, doing that pregame show in Hamilton before the game against Montreal, and it kind of felt like Winnipeg was getting old then, and they were able to bring back everybody for another year, minus like Jamarcus Hardrick, who went to Saskatchewan and got injured. But, it's impressive that they're still doing it. Stanley Bryan in particular, I think, is like 39 or something. So he's going to be in like Jason Peters kind of territory, if he keeps doing this and sticks around, whether it's with, Winnipeg or somebody else. Again, he expressed his intent to keep playing. So, we'll see. Winnipeg, there's some questions. Toronto, there's some questions. As to who's set up better for the future, that's also hard to say. Again, I think we have to wait to see some of these changes and give it a couple weeks or months. Maybe see how free agency goes before you can really have a definitive answer to that.
Jason, it's you. We can start looking towards some of the news. Obviously, we're kind of in the middle of the news cycle, and Rick Campbell now has been officially released. I think we expected that. I think I remember when Jason and I all summer were like, I don't know if Rick's the guy. And then now it's like, oh, okay. But so Rick's moved on. It looks like he's going to Edmonton. The BC's made some promotions that way. And I think CFL News had just put out, Vernon officially going to be traded. We all kind of know this stuff. But kind of thoughts on this now? Anything forward looking? It could be Winnipeg, Toronto, but then especially kind of BC in the West really feels like it could be pretty open here.
Yeah, just to touch on Toronto, I think that they've become, and we'll talk about what Kadeem Carey said after their victory on Sunday, but they've become the new Calgary in a sense. Calgary for years, they were able to, have all these guys go out the door in free agency, and they would just, find these guys out of nowhere and just plug them into the lineup as rookies or second-year players and, not miss a beat. And Toronto's been able to do that. I think they lost a total of 17 players or something like that, something crazy like that last offseason to other CFL teams. I think Hamilton alone signed 7 of them. So it just shows you the amount of turnover that team was able to overcome this year on top of the quarterback injury in the Grey Cup. So just incredibly impressive. It's going to be really interesting going forward, here in Hamilton, now that Ed Hervey now got hired as the GM in Edmonton, who's going to be the next GM here in Hamilton. A lot of rumors speculating about maybe it's going to be Danny McManus, who is the assistant GM in Winnipeg. He is the last Hamilton quarterback to bring a Grey Cup to this city. So it would be an interesting homecoming. And Ted Gavaya, I think is his name, is the other assistant GM in Winnipeg that, maybe gets a job here as well. So it should be interesting to see what happens with that position. I mean, BC's head coach, I think, is the big question because it looks like Edmonton's head coach is going to be Rick Campbell. It looks like all signs are pointing towards Edmonton hiring, just because of the lineage there with Hugh Campbell, his dad, being such a legend there. I think it makes too much sense for them not to do that. BC's head coach, on the other hand, I think that is a big question mark about who it's going to be. It could be a number of different people. Maybe it's a promotion from within. Maybe Jordan Maximic gets that opportunity as a head coach, or maybe they look around the league to a guy like Buck Pierce, who didn't call his best game in the Grey Cup, as we've alluded to, but maybe it's one of those guys that gets a first-time opportunity because there's not too many guys with head coaching experience just sitting around in the CFL.
It is weird. And just to speak on that, and then I have one quick thing about Toronto. Like the Rick Campbell thing is weird to me because, obviously we saw that with Jason Moss from the coordinator, going over to the Alouettes and kind of, what did they call that? Like failing up and he got promoted up. But, generally if you're a coach like Rick, you would take a couple seasons off and people kind of forget about, okay, what's going on. It's like, to me, and people think, I know we've talked about Belichick and whatever in the chat, but like to me, that's the damnedest thing right now is Bill Belichick went from last year where, no one wanted him and kind of saw how, the Patriots kind of collapsed and he was old and kind of whatever. And then, he's doing all this media stuff now and he's like the jolliest, funniest guy in the world. And then, we guarantee he's going to get hired somewhere next year. It's like, that's the same guy that didn't want to do, like, the thing to me with Rick is just wild. Like, we just saw it. Like, we just lived through how many years of this in BC, and now you're going to go hot. Like, why would we expect anything different? And if you have any thoughts on that in a second. The other thing I was going to say with Toronto is it's really a shame to me. Like, this is a really good story and everything. We with Dinwiddie and everything they've gone through and kind of the adversity, which part of which was, self-inflicted with Chad and all that, however you want to look at that. But I do still feel like that kind of hangs over because even in the, I thought Chad was just obnoxious in the parade kind of thing and screaming and yelling. And I understand you're with the team. It's not like you didn't beat the Bombers. You weren't there. You missed half the season. And I think whether you agree with kind of how the league handled that or not, I just think that Chad just doesn't come across as a very likable guy online or doing any of this kind of stuff. And I think that hurts in that regard of just like, this should be very overwhelmingly positive right now for Toronto. And I don't like that. And obviously he's going to be back next year. Andy, any thoughts on anything I've said? I know I dropped a couple different things there.
Well, and just quickly in regards to Chad Kelly, I mean, they've hitched their wagon to him for better or worse. They seem to love him, even if the public doesn't. And whether that has to do with litigation or public perception, they don't seem to care. So we'll see what happens as regards to that. And also, again, with some of the structural shifts, we'll see if someone like John Murphy stay around for that team, the team president. There were some reporting on that I've already seen. We'll see what happens going forward. But as far as the rest of the league, I can sense that there's going to be a dramatic shift in a lot of teams, especially in the West. Obviously, BC is making wholesale changes. Saskatchewan, again, it kind of comes down to, does Trevor Harris stay around? That's really kind of one of the big dominoes. Calgary needs to restock the shelves quickly if Dave Dickinson wants to stay around. I mean, the clock's kind of ticking on him right now, too. And I just wonder about, what kind of changes our Hamilton is going to make. Obviously another season where they didn't really meet their own expectations. A lot of the quarterback movement. We asked Dave Naylor about that. The carousel. I mean, it seems like quarterback musical chairs. Obviously, yes, we know that. Thank you. But reading the fact about Trevor Harris being the same age as Reed, I've never heard that one before. But look, I just wonder about this musical chairs with all the quarterbacks because there's so many different guys that possibly could start that aren't going to have a starting spot when camp opens or when it concludes, I should say. And so for me, I just wonder like where that's all going to go. There's going to be so much movement. I'm really excited for all of it, but what it looks like right now is really going to look a lot different when training camp starts.
Yeah, that was kind of what we, Andy and I kind of all week, it felt like anyone you talk to, even, the Jim Mullins and Jamie and I, everyone was just kind of like, yeah, this is going to be really crazy with that. Yeah, shout out Jim Mullins that came to dinner with all of us. That was fun. Even though, I was laughing because I had texted everyone, hey, I got a special guest coming. I show with Jim, and everyone's like, we thought it was going to be Farhan. I'm like, don't say that when Jim is sitting there. You say that after the fact. You don't say that during the fact. Evan, any thoughts for the future? And then we'll spend the last couple of minutes here telling funny stories, and we'll get out of here because we got it should be a good game tonight, right? We got Steelers, Browns, right? Yeah, Russell Wilson. Here we go.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of movement on many levels. There's going to be personnel. There's going to be coaches. There's going to be players. The BC situation, I think, is an interesting one to monitor. I'll start there. Jordan Maximic, to me, was kind of the automatic name that came to mind, especially given he was the one who kind of brought Nathan Rourke to power in 2022 during his outstanding season that eventually put him into the NFL with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Buck Pierce, I also think, is a convincing name. Like you might remember last year when Saskatchewan was doing their coaching hires, Buck Pierce was a finalist for that job. It came down to, either him or Corey Mace, and they went with Corey Mace. Obviously worked out pretty well for them. Wouldn't mind, I think Buck Pierce has done enough in this league to get an opportunity. Again, part of the yeah, that dynasty term, got to be careful with that. But again, he's been there and he's helped Zach and he's helped Drew Brown. He's helped Chris Streveler. He's helped a lot of prominent names in this league, and especially, I mean, the plethora of receivers that Winnipeg has and just playmakers all around. Andrew Harris you had in the backfield. Then it was Brady Oliveira. So obviously, he's got a wealth of experience that he could bring. The other spot I'll talk about, I mean, I think Edmonton's pretty clear to me at this point. It's already been touched on, but the Hamilton GM opening, I think, is an interesting one. Jason already talked about, Danny McManus, Ted Gavaya. Do those guys come together as a package deal? Currently, they are in that situation under Kyle Walters in Winnipeg, Ted Gavaya being the senior assistant GM and Danny McManus being the just assistant GM who runs the U.S. scouting. So do they hire one? Do they hire both? If they hire one, which one is it? Or do they go external? I mean, I think, you saw like Scott Milanovic, right, was kind of an external hire, a guy who had been in the CFL before but was working in the NFL prior. And I think Kent Austin at one point, who's now doing some stuff at Auburn, had been in Hamilton maybe. And he was a guy who, again, was an external hire at one time. So they kind of have a history with that. The one really interesting name that I saw that came up in some places was Chris Rossetti, who I believe is the director of pro scouting with the New York Giants. Obviously the Giants might be doing some, restructuring in the offseason with their personnel department and coaches and whatever. We've yet to see that, but he was a guy, I'm pretty sure he's Canadian and worked with the Argos when he was young at one point in a variety of, personnel or coaching roles. So that would be one to monitor. Hard to tell, again, which direction Hamilton's going to go yet just with their history. But again, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we could talk about if we had more time. But again, a lot of it, I want to say a lot of it will take time to figure out, but at least on the personnel level, that's stuff that you have to get the ball rolling on pretty quickly because there's decisions to be made, guys to re-sign, and all that. So, yeah.
Yeah, Tim, Andy, Tim here, and then we can start getting into kind of wrapping this and telling stories up. But yeah, like the question will be, what'll BC ask? And I'll tell you, I mean, it's gonna be a sad day when BC finally gets rid of Vernon here. And I know obviously the writing's on the wall and all that, but like, yeah, do we promote Jordan and then it's like the Nathan show? Well, yeah, I hope. I mean, I hope. We'll see. I mean, any things on that end, and then we can kind of transition on.
One thing we didn't touch on that I wanted to say is that the situation in Montreal was one to monitor. I think there were 3 Down Nations guys I was listening to earlier this week. They were saying, because they have a choice to make between, Cody Fajardo and Davis Alexander, that from the people that they've talked to, it seems like Davis Alexander is the guy that they would prefer to keep. So don't be surprised if Cody Fajardo ends up being a free agent. And, with all of these guys, and Naylor was talking about this on the show, being available this offseason, somebody's going to be left without a dance partner at the end here, and someone's going to have to be a backup that we didn't expect. Maybe that's Trey Ford. Maybe that's, Fajardo, like I said. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens this offseason with the quarterback reshuffling.
Yeah. Andy, thoughts on that? Thoughts on VA? And then we'll, because I know he's your boy.
No, he's absolutely right. I mean, just to think of the list off the top of your head, you've got Cody Fajardo and Davis Alexander. I would think that Montreal is, just from what I'm kind of sensing from how Danny Machosha, their GM, talked and how other people are talking, it seems like if they've put in that much work to develop Davis Alexander, then they're probably going to have to roll with him going forward, make the difficult decision of parting ways with Cody Fajardo. So that's kind of the thought there. I agree with Tim, what Tim's saying, Cody maybe being traded and then Alexander being signed to a multi-year contract. Because again, they put so much space and capital in that. Bo Levi Mitchell came up an MOP-esque season. Does Hamilton want to restructure his contract, or is he going to have to go find that money elsewhere? That's another question. Obviously, Chad Kelly. But again, we don't know how healthy Chad Kelly is going to be. Somebody else going to come in and step into Toronto. PJ Walker and Calgary. Is Calgary going to trade for somebody or acquire somebody? Obviously, VA has to be traded to somebody at some point, but does somebody want to be keen on making him the starter? Trevor Harris. Nathan Rourke obviously seems to be the presumed starter in BC. do we assume that Zach Collaros? I mean, again, Zach Collaros, just based on health wise, I know he has to have some time to think, and he said it's pretty much 99.9% chance he comes back. But things can change, and so obviously he has like the Pez dispenser hand, or finger, I should say. But I guess for me,
that'd be really bad.
It's just like Jason was saying, it's a shame that somebody's going to have to be left out of here. yeah, right. Right, but it's a shame that somebody's going to be left out of the dances, like he said. I would think, if you're asking me, yes, my personal homerism here, it would be a damn shame if someone like Vernon Adams didn't have a starting job, or if Trey Ford wasn't given a real chance with somebody. Which, again, if Rick Campbell comes over to Edmonton, I'm just going to say right now, I think Trey Ford needs to head for the hills if that's the case, because Rick is probably going to try and bring in somebody else, and I don't know if that's really the guy that I really want coaching Trey Ford. Sorry, but that's my personal take. And so we'll see what happens going forward. But yeah, I mean, it's good that they have a glut of quarterbacks. I'll say that, because 2 years ago there was complaints that there were not enough quarterbacks, and now all of a sudden they have plenty of them.
Yeah, it was funny, right? Wasn't it in Ed kind of in his like introductory thing with Edmonton, and he's like, we're intense and we want to win and we're here, and I'm like, do you know who you're rumored to be hiring to be your head coach? Like, I didn't want to tweet anything because I don't like hate Rick Campbell, the man, but I'm like, okay, that doesn't speak to yeah, I'm Trey Ford. I get the hell out of there, because there's no place for that. Anything else? We'll round out. I thought it was funny. Anyone had any little fun stories or anything to share here at the end? I'm glad that we got Andy an audience with John Hodge and JC with the 3 Down podcast. I was happy to facilitate that. Jason had to fly back early. We went in there. John Hodge, very quiet to me. I did get a thanks for coming handshake the last night there. It was not too chatty with me. I talked more with that Joel guy that works with 3 Down. We talked with JC a little bit. I'm glad Andy was able to talk with him. Anyone else have any takeaways, any other stuff from Vancouver, anything else, any other observations?
Yeah, it was cool to see, just from hanging out in the team party headquarters, just seeing Bo Levi Mitchell and other people walking around. I mean, that's what is the beauty of the CFL and beauty of Grey Cup, is just stuff like that you'd never see in the NFL, where like people are just down to earth and personal with you. You can meet anybody. And I just love that about Grey Cup week.
Yeah, it was funny. I went to the Kraken game last night. My buddy was like, "Oh, so like does Grey Cup like have a big like thing around it?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's like 80% of the thing is like going to the things around the Grey Cup and then the game." Evan, any takeaways from you? Anything you enjoyed your experiences in Vancouver?
Well, I do have one funny story. Okay. So, we were in the FRC suite or whatever. I was there like 11 to 12:30, and then I had to go to bed because my flight back out here, I had to connect through Houston. I had to get up at like 5:30 in the morning. One of the guys that I was hoping to see was Naylor, because I didn't get to see him on the show, and me and him obviously talk a lot, developed a relationship with him. So I'm on my way back, the next day, right? I'm in Houston on my connecting flight, and I'm texting Naylor, and I'm like, hey, man, I was in the suite last night from whatever time to whatever time. I was a bit late, but I didn't see you. He goes, oh, well, that's interesting. I got there at 2:45 in the morning and was there till 4. But yeah, I mean, we'll catch up eventually or whatever. And I said, well, that would have been great, Dave, but I had to get up at 5:30, for my 8:30 flight. And then we joked and I said, well, I guess I'm only a rookie because whatever I thought was late clearly is not. But no, look, we had a good time. And again, even though I was only there for what ended up being a bit more than a day, we made the most of it, right? Like that Jason pointed out, that team party headquarters thing was fantastic. It was in Hamilton and then in BC, just with the setup there, at the convention center. Again, I have to give credit. Like, this is a guy we've talked about plenty of times, and I know, Reed, you're obviously very fond of, but like Amar Doman, man, it's incredible to see his buy-in to this league, and you can tell he really cares. And, that zip line stuff going on there, man, I mean, that was all just crazy. Like, I didn't anticipate that. I had no idea that was even going on until I had seen some tweets a couple days before I got there, right, when they were setting it up for the whole week. Just an incredible event, really. Like, I thought Hamilton was great, but I remember, going to that convention center in BC and thinking there's just so much room here. There's so much going on, and as Jason pointed out too, You know, a lot of players walking around, just very casual. You can strike up a conversation with anybody. And that's the great part about, you know, what this league offers compared to, say, you know, the NFL or maybe even college football to a degree. You just don't really ever get that experience, you know, and I know I had a great time talking to people. It's just really easy when you don't have to, you know, necessarily coordinate external meetups and everybody's kind of already in one place. It's like just one spot where everything's happening. And yeah, good time all around.
Yeah, it was funny. I co-signed that, and yeah, Andy, I think his computer died. He's back. I was just resizing stuff on my end. I'm like, oh, did I I hope I didn't kick anyone out, or did I get dropped off or whatever? But it's cool seeing everyone around, and like Evan said, it's in an approachable way. That Paul and I remember when we did WrestleMania years ago, and like you might run into wrestlers who do whatever, but it's, hey, you want a photo? It's $50, or you want a signature or whatever. Hey, buy my shirt. We'll stop. Like, there's a lot of that kind of thing where everybody there, like, you could have walked in at anyone at any time and said, hey, let me get a photo or a handshake, or just say congrats or whatever. Really kind of approachable that way. Yeah, Tim liked the drone show. We did that. We were in the wrong. Evan was late. Getting in because his flight, he wasn't late. His flight didn't get in. And Andy and I and Dorothy went out to see that. We were on the wrong side of the pier, and so we kind of realized it was, there was no like music. It would have helped with that, or announcements or anything with that. But I will just say my thing, and I'll toss to you two guys. We'll get out of here for Thursday Night Football. Like, I just thought the West Coast aspect of it made it so nice. I thought the area worked down there great, having the team headquarters, having the media row and all of that, having the water there. I know the zip line and all that, but you didn't even necessarily have that, but everything. And then just the game and just not having it be 2 degrees. Jason, I understand that, like, okay, the Canadian League and we need to play it, but like the fact that you could just sit and watch the game and not have to worry about like freezing to death when a really long, I'm not saying it's got to be an every year thing, but like every 2-3 years, it gives people, you can bring out your kids and stuff. You don't have to worry about, we got to put 18 layers on them. Like, it just made the game watching so much more enjoyable. That like I could just sit there in jeans and a sweatshirt and watch the game.
Yeah, I agree. Like, even as a Canadian, I don't love the cold. I mean, I'm not looking forward to how cold it's going to be next year in Winnipeg, especially. So I will say the previous 2 Grey Cups in Hamilton, or 2 of the last 3 years in Hamilton, it wasn't that cold, especially the one that was 2021, which was in December, the latest Grey Cup ever played. I thought it was, ridiculously warm for December. So hopefully it's similar to that in Winnipeg.
Tell my wife that. It was not to us. Andy, anything else, and we'll get out of here?
I just had an enthralling experience from front to back. I know I'm the rookie here. My first time being there, first time being in Vancouver. I loved it from every aspect, every angle. I loved going to outside with all the different bands playing. I didn't ride any of the zip lines, but I loved just seeing how fun it was. People were just so into it. The convention centers are great. A lot of things to do, especially for the kids. And then the team party HQs. I will say, and this is an interesting point that's been brought up by a couple of different podcasts, maybe the space was too big, but you know what? I'd rather it be too big than too small, just my personal standpoint, because you can put in as much as you want. Go big or go home, and they certainly did. The presentation with the Grey Cup, I thought the national anthem was beautiful. I loved the halftime performance. I'm not a Jonas Brothers fan, but I think the presentation was great. The lighting, the paneling up on the upper rafters at BC Place was great. The biggest thing, that my biggest takeaway, especially with all the people that we talked to, and the things about how you could just see coaches, you could see owners. I mean, Amar Doman was just walking around, on the ground floor before the Grey Cup, talking to people. I mean, from our standpoint, just to understand as Americans, there's such a velvet rope aspect, especially in sports, where it's like, hey, don't talk to this person, like, oh, leave them alone. Like, we can't have you talking. No, that was not the sense here. Everybody could talk to anybody at any point about anything, and no one was really being harassed. I really love that a lot. Obviously, I know you are not the biggest fan, and maybe I'm not the biggest fan of him either, Reed, but seeing Rick Campbell just walking around in the convention center was really cool. I mean, I had coaches just, hanging out. Like, that part of it is so cool. And I really appreciate that. And I just appreciated all of really just want to shout out all the media personnel who were kind to me, even though they never met me personally before, for them to just be like, hey, yeah, you're part of the troop. Like, this is it's your space, like no hazing. I'm not saying they would, but like, you know, sometimes it'd be a little rough in the business. And so I appreciate it, and I really appreciate being part of that process. And I absolutely want to go back to Vancouver. I have to say, going to the Grey Cup is like, it's like a drug. You know, it really is. And I get why people are so into it and why it's so traditional. And if anything else, I just wish more people could experience it because it's really that great.
Yeah, Andy, I was really worried the first year we went. Like, would there be some sort of hazing or gatekeeping? Paul and I dealt a lot with that online. And no, I mean, everyone couldn't be nicer about media events. Anything else for Evan and Jason? We'll get out of here. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Like and subscribe. We will, like I said, probably go dark here. I know we're going to have the UFL schedule coming out. Look for, Andy and I might try to figure out a stream or something with that when that comes. It's been, many weeks coming, but we'll see. And then, like I said, once we start getting some UFL content, I can get some CFL interviews on here. It's not worth the squeeze to get, try to track down and whatever to get 15 minutes and just have it die on here with the algorithm. So we'll start packaging up some of that stuff. We'll be quiet for a little bit, but we post everything on here. Turn on the bells and notifications, subscribe, everything else. Jason, thanks for coming. It was great hanging out with you and Alex and Evan, making the time and flighting through the flights and everything. And Andy, as always, and appreciate, everyone, all the media, everyone else. Couldn't have gone better. We will see you guys next time.